To be in person, good for small. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. This is a little early start. We're just going to make sure that the sound will go back to the folks watching from home. So just hold on for a moment and we'll get started in about 3 minutes.
I just feel bad. It's frustrating.
I'm gonna stay home. Not Craig Melvin.
It's okay.
Bright lights.
Might be a snigger.
Hope he brings that back. Wait, now I'm standing in front of somebody. You don't need me on this picture?
One little step that way, yeah, so I get the, yeah. Just the way you are, you guys look great. Perfect shot.
So is there no audio on the webinar?
It's not coming in as it's supposed to yet. But that's okay, because we have a few moments.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We'll be starting in just a moment. Thank you for coming out. And this is one I wish I could tap dance, actually.
Right.
Give it a try.
When I was like 5, I knew how to do that. Not so much anymore.
Go back to the piano option.
Let's go. It's big. Did you take a picture with our phone?
It's more tattered than
It is tattered.
You should do a selfie with that. Yeah.
I'm not as close. I'll probably break it.
The resolution is beautiful.
I don't even know how to turn it around. Okay, so,
I'll just take one of you with that.
okay.
I took one.
So
I
there's
took
lots of pictures of me in the world.
Have your turners around.
I need a picture.
Well, I will.
Oh, what? Yeah,
Take
sure.
your selfie then.
No.
Come on. Come on.
I can't selfie. You know I can't selfie.
Killing
Have
me.
it with people at home. Might be easier. So we'll be starting shortly. We're just holding for a second longer while we fix this one small technical difficulty.
There's always one.
Can you send Douglas the link so we can have a test? Because everything should be working perfectly. Can Travis send the invitation? It's when it works perfectly and then it doesn't. It's a tough one to fix.
I know.
Don't say that.
A surreal moment.
But as long as you got your health, okay?
That's what someone said to me recently. As long as you have your health. Did you already say that?
No, not believe it. Yeah.
From the early before.
Experiencing a small technical difficulty, and we'll be on very early with everybody at home. If you are watching from home,
Jennifer, your mic is not on there.
I don't think that mic's on.
if you're watching from home and you can hear me, if you could type in a yes to the Q&A, that would be fabulous for us, and that way we will know that you can hear me and we can get started. And we have sound. We have sound. Yes, we do.
Good.
Break a leg, folks. We have the fixer.
Well, no, not actually.
Okay. All right, everybody, thank you so much for, let me take this off for a moment. Thank you all for your patience at this point. We're just going to get started with a new little visual for those of you watching from home. So welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jennifer Keller, and I am the programming coordinator here at the Westport Library. Whew, we are so happy you could join us, either here or from home at Zoom. So a couple of reminders before we start tonight's program. If you're joining us in the building, please remember that per town guidelines, we do ask that you keep your masks on at all times inside the library, even when asking a question. And please do remember to silence your cell phones while the program is in progress, because we've forgotten about that watching Zoom all the time. So, without further ado, since we've waited long enough, in honor of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we are proud to introduce you to two people who now regard the disease and its treatment in a brand new way. Liza Marshall is a retired communications attorney who left practice to channel her skills to cancer support organizations and her family. She helped found Hope Connections for Cancer Support in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. John Marshall received his training at Duke University, the University of Louisville, and Georgetown University. He is an internationally recognized expert in new drug development for gastrointestinal cancer and has established the Otto J. Roisch Center for the Cure of GI Cancers. And on stage with them tonight is moderator Dr. Pamela Kunz, an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Oncology at Yale School of Medicine and the director of the Center for Gastrointestinal Cancers at Yale's Cancer Center and Smilow Cancer Hospital. And she's the vice chief for diversity, equity, and inclusion for the section of medical oncology. She has received her medical degrees from Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine. So, without further ado, I'm just going to hand over the stage to these three.
Thank you very much. And thank you for coming in person and for those who are listening online. I've had the pleasure of spending the last part of the, yesterday and today with John and Liza. So thank you so much for coming. And I'm excited to talk with you about your book.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. So,
And congratulations on your recent award. It's really impressive. So you all don't know, but this one is the Oncologist of the Year.
Woman
Oncologist of the Year.
Yeah, thank you.
I would, both would be true for me.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you. So how about we start for folks in the audience, both here and at home, who don't know anything about the book. Maybe I'll start with Liza. Let's give us just a brief synopsis of the book.
Well, what I like to refer to as the dramatic tension behind the book is that John is, as I said, gastrointestinal oncologist, and he has gastrointestinal oncology sometimes is the poor stepchild in cancers, as some are, and breast cancer tends to take up much of the oxygen in the room, so to speak. And so John has long pushed gastrointestinal cancers to kind of come together and be unified in trying to build the same kind of advocacy and funding for research that breast cancer has received. And thunderbolt from heaven, his wife is diagnosed with a dire prognosis of triple negative breast cancer, and so he viewed that somewhat as a vengeance on his having railed against and been jealous of the success of the breast cancer community.
So we went through that from two different perspectives. So all of a sudden I went from being an oncologist focused on one kind of cancer to a caregiver, having to see what we do for a living from the other side, and even see our own product, because Liza got her care at Georgetown, where I am. And so that was just a totally new perspective. You think you're a really, really good doc. I think most docs do think they're really good docs. And then you realize that all of a sudden you see it from the other side, and you clearly see ways you can be better at it and better understand that. So we thought, given all of those tensions and the fact that you are still here, thanks to the breast cancer machine, that we had a chance to share this story with others. So that's really the point of it.
Yeah, and I love, again, for those of you who haven't read it, the kind of alternating storylines. They really alternate chapters in the book, and I think it's beautiful because often it's on the same topic, but it's from two different perspectives.
Yeah, I think if we had to actually write the same book together, we would not be married any longer. It would be over. So we actually went to our different corners and wrote what we thought we were feeling and thinking at the time, and then later on fold it together. So I always say it's like my version and the correct version of the story.
Yeah, which isn't true, but we did really realize how differently we perceived the exact same events. I mean, some of it is actually memories are different of what happened, but much of it is perspective, and I think for both of us, we brought several different perspectives to that. I mean, I had been involved in this cancer organization actually before I was diagnosed, so and had attended a lot of John's talks and knew a little bit that side, but all of a sudden was a patient. And John, as he says, all of a sudden became a caregiver, which is really a very different role for an oncologist, I think. I mean, you care for somebody in a very different way from the way you do as their doctor.
Right. So your diagnosis was 15 years ago. Tell us why you wrote the book and why now. And I don't know, John, if you want to talk about it.
First, we actually were sparked to do it, or prompted to do it by a very good friend. There was a local magazine article about initially Liza and cancer and the cancer support community. And it was, the Arlington magazine, I'm sure everybody gets the same version at their own home. And the journalist just really did a nice job of digging to that next layer. And so it comes out, our kids for the first time read the story. And this had been about 6, 7, 8 years.
7, yeah.
Yeah, 7 years since your diagnosis. And then our friends and neighbors read the story. And then with too much wine, as I remember correctly, our friend, who's also a journalist and a very accomplished writer herself, an editor, she goes, "You have to write this book." And we tried. We actually made an attempt. Kids were still at home. Career was still very, very busy. And we realized that then we couldn't do it. We didn't have the bandwidth, the space. And it's only later, I think, that we realized that we weren't ready. part of the title of Off Our Chest was getting stuff off our chest to each other. Because there was stuff we didn't say at the time. I know I didn't say at the time, things I was thinking and the like, that it was only going to be harmful to say. But in the end, I'm glad I could finally get it off my chest, if you will. So the passage of time, in many ways, was critical. But I think the other key part of this has to do with a sort of sub-theme of the book, and that's medical burnout, is that I was getting really, really tired of doing what I was doing. And seeing a lot of people die on my watch, and we do a hard thing. You and I do very similar things, and I was getting worn out on it and trying to manage a division and a system. So we were lucky enough to be able to take a break and take a sabbatical. So we had this we had this magical 6 months, 4 months of which we were in Oxford, and we got to, what a great place to write and turn off the old life. It was pre-pandemic. We couldn't see that coming, but thank goodness it was pre-pandemic. Yeah. But anyway, the burnout and the sabbatical really gave us the moment to stop and think and write. Yeah. So that's why now.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Well, and I think being away together alone, I mean, as John says, we wrote separately and then shared what we wrote. And we did, even then, however many years later, had some things that we had written about each other that we each found a little hurtful, I think. And you know, I think, speaking of our marriage survived, we were, you know, there was nobody else around us. We were in a quiet place where we could hash it out in, you know, Christchurch Meadows in Oxford, and, you know, one afternoon.
There were some sheep that I think are traumatized from hearing our discussions, but other than that, it went pretty well, yeah.
Can you think of some of those specific examples that were surprises or that were hurtful that you ended up discovering?
Yeah, well, I think...
Pick anyone.
Yeah, there's so many. No.
You're like, yes, exactly, I do.
You, I'm sure, have none, but I have a lot. John points frequently to one, which I think is a little background for those who haven't read the book. John lost his mother when he was 13, also to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So he had experienced this in person already. And one of the things he wrote in the book, and I think it is still in there, is that he hoped that if I was going to die, that I was going to die fast. And because he really couldn't go through it again. And, you know, I understood that, but at the same time I read that and I was like, really? That's what you wanted, you know? And I completely understand why. But anyway, to read that was hard.
We watch so many caregivers, honestly, care for their loved one with cancer through sometimes years. Right. And the sacrifice that caregiver has to make of their own lives to do what's the best for their loved one is, we see it. I mean, they may never talk to each other about it, but we see it. And I knew I was not going to be good at that. And I'm, naturally selfish, and naturally it's all about me. And to have to do that and give up those things was going to be hard. So it was what I was thinking, that I wasn't going to be able to do it for long. And there are couples that break up over it, too. So yeah. I think that was the winner on Mean Things that I wrote.
So as we talk about the origins of the book, I think I asked you guys this last night, but tell us about the Tattered Ribbon. Yeah. And I like the story, so I'd love to share that with the audience.
Well, we received several graphic designs from the publisher, and we were actually very resistant to the idea of a pink ribbon because we really first
of all, we know John does not.
Right, we know John doesn't like breast cancer, and we really did want this to be a book that we hope is not only useful to breast cancer patients, but is useful to cancer patients in general, because I think cancer is very similar from a caregiver and patient perspective in many ways, the things that we talk about in the book. But when this one came to us, we looked at it and we were like, there's something there, but it wasn't nearly as tattered the first time around. And so the publisher said, I just think it needs to be a little more beaten up. And so they sent this one through, and we're like, yes, that's it. And I think, we sort of view it as several things. The patient experience, what cancer treatment does to a patient does beat them up. I mean, both while you're going through it and you carry those scars for the rest of your life. But also, I think we see it as sort of a statement on the breast cancer, what we sort of refer to as the breast cancer industrial complex, which has in many ways started with a wonderful mission and has, has really, in some regards, has lost its way. Not everybody, but some of the organizations, I think, have become very much about making sure the pink ribbon is on everything while maybe losing the goal of actually trying to improve cancer care. So I think those two, and then John also was very beaten up by. I mean, the caregiver was beaten up, and as John says, really caused him to develop burnout over time. So.
Yeah. Not right away though, because the worn ribbon depicts that. It took a while to really feel that, because one of the things I wanted to do after the experience we had, we were very privileged. We do talk some in the book about U.S. healthcare and cancer care and the cost of it and all of those things. But we were very privileged. We got immediate care, scans whenever we wanted them. Everything happened without our even asking. And we recognized that. And so then when you go back to the trenches and be a doctor again, and also having the position I had at my place was like, how do we make that for everybody? Can we, in fact, extend that same care level to everybody who walks in the door, whether it's at Yale or Georgetown or wherever. Right. And so we tried, and whether that's giving patients your cell phone or your email, or being very responsive, or trying to put in extra layers for people so that their care is more smooth, you realize you can't do it. You can't get to the level that we got. And so that's really the worn outness of this, is you just keep trying, and eventually you can't do it anymore.
Yeah. You've touched on this a little bit already, the roles of patient, caregiver, doctor. What do you want your readers to learn about those roles that they might not otherwise? And I don't know, you can both answer that.
Well, yeah, I'm sure we both have something to say on that. I mean, I think just first, we really wanted to draw the curtain back, I think, on each one of those, so that each party or sort of a triad of healthcare worker, caregiver, and patient gets a better view maybe of what the other components of that triangle are going through. And I think we really both learned a lot. And when John says, he saw what the things that oncologists do to patients, what those look like when they go home. It's one thing when you see them every 2 weeks in the infusion unit, but it's side effects and things like that, and the mental piece. But also, I think I also want people to know I am married to an oncologist, and I see a lot of what the oncologist brings home at the end of the day, and it's a very hard job. And so I think trying to give people the recognition that all of the people involved in this are humans with their frailties and their imperfections. And we didn't really talk about it so much in the book, but it's sort of come to the realization that we hope that people start to give each other a little more grace, in not only in this, but I think in life in general.
Yeah. I mean, the caregiver part of that triangle used to annoy me, right? So they were, you're talking to the patient, and they're over here taking all these notes, right, and asking all the hard questions because they've got the journal articles and they've done their homework. And I'm like, you're just taking my time, right? And I woke up to that. So I was...
Because you were that person.
Then I became that person on the other side of what that job is. And that job is more than just being the in-the-clinic advocate. It is, delivering that patient on time with counts, and everybody else in the family is taken care of so that we can keep doing cancer care. Because cancer care is repetitive, complex, and requires a team, requires a sort of village even to manage. And that caregiver's job is that. And then with some very good caregivers who wouldn't get off my back, right? Who was not going to take no for an answer, taught me some more lessons about just how important they were, particularly as it became end of life, because then the patient could no longer really be the advocate for at all. And so you start with your first visit looking straight at the patient, and then towards the last visits, you're over here. You're only talking to the caregiver. And so that triad, at least in those patients with stage 4 disease, is incredibly important. And so my valuing the caregiver now is I no longer think of them as annoying. I actually worry when there's not one. in the room and ask about where is this person? Is somebody, can they be on the phone? You know, something, because I know having help during all of this makes the outcomes better. There's a fact, actually, I think it's a paper that was published that said married people live longer with cancer. So, you know, you don't have to get married for it, but you need a caregiver around.
That's not universal.
No.
Yeah. And as an oncologist myself, I can relate to the comments of trying to see physicians and oncologists as more human. You know, how did this experience, John, change you as a doctor?
Yeah, I think I'm slower in clinic.
That's not just age.
No, maybe it is. I try to listen more. I try to find out more about what's going on the other side. It's less about delivering some scientific response, you know, some medical response. And it's particularly true in oncology, where there's a lot of vagaries, is how do you make decisions? How much do you know? Who is behind the scenes of this visit? Mm-hmm. I often ask on a first visit, like, how many people know you're here? And that very simple question tells you a lot about how private they are. Mm-hmm. Are they told nobody? Do the kids know? Don't they know? And it gives me a sense of where they are at that moment, instead of just walking in and treating everybody as the next patient. So, you know, maybe a dermatologist can get away with that, but I don't think we can. So it taught me a lot about that. And the hope is, and we're both in this position, I mean, Liza's in this position too, of educating the next generation, of how do we share what we've learned and our experiences so that others can be, you know, not have to learn some of the lessons the hard way.
Yeah. Liza, do you see that? How do you see that question through your lens?
Yeah, I mean, how it's changed John's practice, yeah. Well, I mean, he's, you know, it was a progression, I would say. I mean, as after I was diagnosed, he, you know, he slowly let his patient, that's not the best way of putting it, I guess, but was, you know, more accessible to his patients, which is wonderful, but from, you know, seeing it from the other side, I could see how much that was taking out of him as well. Mm-hmm. And, you know, some of that is time, some of it's never being able really to get away from what he did and does, but some of it was also this bringing everybody's story home with him. And not that he sat around and talked about it, but I think, you know, you could see it. And you know, we kind of joke, my daughter and I, particularly our daughter, would say, you know, he's getting crankier. I mean, we used to joke that John, you know, somebody at work had once told him that he had lost his sparkle. And you know, he had. I mean, he's a very, as you can tell, you know, he's kind of a, you know, he's a humorous guy.
Very gray sparkle now.
Right. And so, you know, and he just was sort of getting progressively more crabby, and just could see less joy in the world, I think. And so that was really hard to see as a spouse, and for our children. So but he has really, you know, the sabbatical. I mean, you know, the good news out of all that is that he did recognize that he was burning out and that he did need to get away. And I think he has made some changes in since we've been back. He has tried to build those, to create the boundaries that are warm and empathetic, but are there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really hard line to walk, and I know you know. I mean, it's a challenge.
I got a can of spray sparkle too, so that has helped a lot. Sort of,
I'll borrow it. I want to switch subjects a little bit and talk some about the family unit and how cancer affects the family unit. You talk about your children, you talk about your respective parents. I know you had young children at the time, and I know when I take care of patients with young children, I make a real point of addressing that. So maybe you can talk us through how you told your children, how it affected them, how they reacted. And
maybe I'll go first this time. But I mean, the kids, you know, when you grow up in our houses, they're cancer kids. They know
they
about
hear about
cancer.
it all the time.
They know about it. They had friends. In our case, our son Charlie had a friend's mom die just a year or so before that. And so, I mean, they knew about this stuff. And so and they were 13 and 10. And so that day, the day of the diagnosis, traumatic enough, we ended it by sitting them down in her parents' living room and really telling them what we knew at that point. And our son, who was at that stage and a boy, basically said, okay, you're gonna be okay, let me know if it's not, and he was done. And then our daughter, who, I mean, I would still think even today is unsure of what the impact was at this point, at that point. You know, says for a long time that she was okay, but we sort of were more nervous about her. Antennae were up all the time, and it seemed to us at least. So we did try to be straight with them, you know, tell them messages that I to this day share with our patients is, you know, we'll tell you everything. You can ask anything. This is what we know today. And so that's how we started the journey, and I think for the most part it was okay, although we question it a lot now.
Well, we realized that we never really went back and filled them in again as things were going along. And I mean, obviously they lived with us, and so they could see a lot of things.
They noticed their mother didn't die. They did.
Yeah, and that her hair came back in. But, you know, so I think in retrospect, particularly as they read the article and then read the manuscript of the book, I mean, we keep quoting our son, who has now declared that it needs a sticker on it that says "Read it and weep," because he got married in July and decided to take it on his honeymoon.
Oh,
Do
no.
not ask me why. And his wife was like, "Why did you bring that on our honeymoon?" But anyway, for both of them, you know, they came back to us and said, well, we had no idea. I mean, our son, after he read the article, said, I thought you had stage 1. Well, I don't even know that we set a number at the time, but we probably used, you know, more like it's in the nodes or something. And so anyway, we learned that in many ways, maybe we didn't tell them as much as we should have. We thought we were, but perhaps we didn't.
I mean, I was struck because Liza had said, my mom had cancer as a kid. Well, nobody told any kids back then about cancer.
Right.
You just didn't talk about it, and you ignored it, although we all knew what was going on, and never really had closure moments at home. It was not something you did, and so it has been kind of a thing with me ever since, obviously. And
I was wondering that.
Yeah, and I do wonder about the kids at home, and I'm sure you said you do too. I mean, it's extra time, but it's important because it's crazy, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but clinic is kind of the safe place for these patients, and they can say they're treated as normal human beings there. Whereas I think it was the first time a friend of ours who's an oncologist passes you, gives you what you termed the mournful oncologist. Look, but in clinic you don't get that, because we're all in the same club. So it's a safe place, oddly enough, and so it is a place you can talk about some of these things. So we try.
Yeah, no, that's great. Can you tell one of the anecdotes from the book that I think you describe as kind of one of the humorous moments of like the wig? Can you talk about that and the kids? And I think that's a nice story.
Yeah, well, so, going to get a wig was, I was never very attached to my hair anyway, and I didn't have great hair. So I wasn't that concerned about losing my hair and having it shaved off. And so we went off, and it was Christmas holidays, and the kids, we all went. John went too, and I was like, I want everybody to be a part of this. I want everybody to be enthusiastic about my wig because you're going to have to look at it for a while, and I don't need teasing about how silly I look. And so anyway, we went, and there's this wonderful person in Washington who does this for a lot of women, and he brought us in and he showed us a bunch of wigs. I mean, he had hundreds of wigs, and he had some ideas about what would look good. And his suggestion, which I thought was great, was, you don't want to get too different because you don't want to have to explain to everybody in the world why, people who see you regularly, why you look different. So anyway, we had this great time, and the kids had, my daughter said, oh, I think you should get a blue mohawk, and which was nothing like what I had already. But anyway, we picked one, and it was really joyous, and it was, right before, as I say, right before Christmas. So we were, everybody was kind of getting in the spirit, and then we get John's version.
Well, that
I liked reading those chapters back to back. It was interesting.
It's not funny.
It's not funny.
So, so I was there, and I had a different take on it, because, patients wear wigs. They wear them, some of them wear them all the time, and particularly if they're getting sicker, they shrink a little bit, and the patient shrinks. The wig stays the same size. And it sort of moves around on their heads, and it doesn't, we know it's a wig, right? We know it's you're not hiding it. But they just don't feel comfortable out in public without their hair on, top up. And then it's sort of this, always, when I see that, it's sort of always this flashback to, there was a wig in my mother's closet. And, the last time I saw her, she sort of shriveled up on a bed. She couldn't really talk to us. And wig, twisted, covering half her face, because she wasn't going to take that wig off for anything. And so for me, one, I really like women with no hair on the top. It's a great look for me. I was excited for this and didn't want to cover it up. But it just was not a good memory. It's a hard memory, and it makes me think of sick people. And I didn't want to, when Liza wore it, I couldn't help but think this was not my wife, and that this was somebody who was going to get sick and maybe die. And so I was glad when wig season was over, let's put it that way. Actually, one of the most proud moments of my life was Liza was on the board of directors of our kids' school, and Charlie was in the graduating class of the K through 8 class, and her hair was just starting to come back in, so it was that little peach fuzzy, that just first comes in, as cute as could be. And she asked the head of the school, could she go top down to hand out the diplomas?
I asked the kid. I asked Charlie too.
No, you did. Charlie
really had veto power.
That's right. But I was sitting in the audience watching my son graduate from 8th grade, and my wife up there with
It
top
represented
down. It was awesome.
It did represent. Yeah.
It was an awesome day. So.
Yeah, that's great. Can we talk about uncertainty? And I think that's also a thread throughout the book, and also something that I make a point of really addressing that when I talk with patients about how it's learning to cope with uncertainty of the diagnosis. I'd love to know how you both coped with that.
Gosh, how did I cope with it? I think I think cancer patients, for many people, even for people for whom control isn't necessarily that important, I think all of a sudden control becomes very important. And finding the things in your life that you can control, and maybe that's, getting a wig. That's one thing. It's like, I picked that out, I'm going to wear it. For me, it was also trying to maintain as much of my normal life as I could. There were certainly days that I didn't feel up to doing things, but I didn't drop any jobs. I didn't want, not only did I not want other people to think of me that way, but I didn't want to think of me as, sorry, I keep bashing that thing. I didn't want to think of myself as sick or unable. And, very fortunate to have lots of people who swept in when needed, but then stepped out of the way. And I think, having that kind of recognition that from the people around you too, that you need to keep on doing as you were doing before, is really important. So, I think for me it was really a lot about not pretending it wasn't happening, but putting it in the back of my mind as much as I could when I could. And I found chemo days. Again, this is before, we all could get our emails on our cell phones. So it would be harder to do today, but, I couldn't get a phone call. It was sort of talk about a safe place. It was not only a safe place, but it was kind of a quiet place. And I purposely picked things to do on that day that were fun for me. And so that in a sense, I could look forward to them as well.
Mm-hmm. For me, the uncertainty is on the medical side too, as we offer therapies. There are very few areas of medicine where there's as much uncertainty as in oncology.
That's right.
And, Liza might have been cured by the surgery. She then ends up getting 4 different chemo drugs and radiation, plus a bone medicine. So in all of that, I don't know what fixed her, right? Which one of those? Right. So what did we do? We pour it all on in the hopes that one of those will be the right thing.
And I still think it was George Clooney, but you have to read
the
book to find out.
I know.
Yeah, he keeps coming back. And I don't think he's going to play me in the movie either, so that's out. But when you're choosing therapies or when you're trying to educate patients around things, and they want to do stuff. They're motivated out of fear. So fear's a big, powerful thing here. But if you knew what the answer was, you would do it very differently. And so we are working, as you know, from as hard as we can to be less uncertain, to use the right amount of medicines, to use the right medicine for the right patient. And we are getting smarter, there's no question. But the waiting, for me, was the worst. The uncertainty of whether she was cured or not is, to me, the worst window.
Yeah, it is the worst part.
And, you've done the work of the surgery and the treatment that you're going to do. And then you just wait until enough time passes, and it's different for every kind of cancer, that it's not going to come back. And I guess one good thing about your cancer was that 3 to 5 years, it's probably not coming back. Whereas some other kinds, you never know.
That's
It
right.
goes forever. So that window of will the other shoe drop or not, I find was hardest for me. And I think actually maybe some of the hardest for patients in general.
And it turned me into a hypochondriac. I mean, every little thing, it was, you find a bump here or something hurt, and, do I call my oncologist or am I just being a kook? And, it's really, it was
we were told to go out and exercise, right? So we did it together, and we were running a lot, and then she gets a pain right here in her bone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a bone mat until proven otherwise, right? And a headache is a brain tumor. And so oncologists, if you don't know this, I don't know if you do this, I get a scan about every Friday just to make sure that it's not what I'm feeling, right? So just to be sure. Because we see all these people all the time that was just a simple pain that turns into something. So that was a rough few years.
We both have our hypochondriacal moments.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
We do.
Well, I'd like to end with one last question that is more positive. So, and I'm going to use just an anecdote that a patient once said to me when I was a brand new doctor and thought I knew everything. And I was spouting off, Kaplan-Meier survival curves and data, and the patient said to me, "Doc, your job is not to take away my hope." And so I want to talk about hope. And you can address that in whatever way you want, but if it's something that you are hopeful for in terms of your journey, or talk about hope in general, but let's end on that.
Yeah, well, when you say hope, I'm involved with an organization called Hope Connections for Cancer Support, and we actually were founded under another name, the Wellness Community, and I was part of the group that then helped to develop the new name, and we knew from step one, we didn't know what all the other words were, but we knew that hope was the most important word, and I think hope is, that the patient is exactly, it is.
Oh, I learned so much from
that. Right. Well, it's again, I live with an oncologist. I know it's another hard line to walk. Right. There's also the patients who come back to you and say, you weren't honest with me, and figuring out not only what the right thing to say is, but also not only generally, but to a specific patient, because we all bring our own hopes and fears to every interaction and to everything that happens in our lives. So that's a more general answer, but I do think that for all of us, and it doesn't have, your hope doesn't have to come from your oncologist, right? There are lots of places to get hope from, and there's so much, a cancer diagnosis is a terrible thing. But it does sharpen your focus, and I think part of that focus is seeing the hope that is around you every day. It may change from day to day. Some days it's easier to find than others, but keeping that as part of your life is really, I think, crucial to the joy that you can then bring into your life from there.
Yeah. I might just add, as this is probably mostly a lay audience. We know, but there's tension in a hospital among different kinds of physicians about how far people go with their cancer treatment.
Right.
And we've been on a long journey with patients for sometimes years, and they're only meeting them at the last minutes or hours or days of that journey. And they look at us like we don't, they're critical of us for defending that patient's choice to do the next thing. And so we we are the keepers in some ways of hope, because we know how important that is for all of us to wake up the next morning and have a purpose and something to do positively. And every day we can offer a quality of life, and that's the balance, right? That's always the trick. That's meaningful for that person is what our job is the task that we have. And the pandemic has been really hard on everybody. And if you think about it, having cancer during the pandemic was probably in many ways doubly hard. We couldn't have visitors in the hospital for a long time, and it was a particularly rough time for the staff, for the team, going through all of that. But it does feel, and I will end with this, that I'm very optimistic for our future in cancer medicine. As we get better at it, as we get smarter about understanding how to do it better, as we understand our patients, as patients understand us better, I think the decade ahead is something that I'm looking forward to watching and being a part of, because I do think we are going to find more cures, and we are going to get smarter, and we are going to make this journey easier for everybody, but we'll only do it if we do it together.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we do have some questions from those at home. If you are here in the Trevs Forum and you have a question for the Marshalls or for Dr. Kunz, please step over to the microphone over there. You can keep your mask on. It will pick you up, and that way everybody at home will also hear what you're asking. But let's get started with those people at home. This first question is, how do you balance knowing the statistics and probability of success of various treatments with applying that specific one to a person's individual care?
You want to take this?
No, you can go first.
This also is different in different disease types, believe it or not. So the breast cancer culture, let's pick on them a little bit more.
You haven't done that enough.
No, we haven't done that enough yet. But so the participation in clinical trials, the number of people who do them, the number of trials that the breast cancer community has done, has actually pushed things so far, so quickly, relative to the others. But it's also split some hairs, right? So, treatment A, if you give treatment B, you'll fix one more person out of 100. But it will cost you this much more side effects. And so how do you describe that to a person who's afraid and they want everything on the table? Whereas, and this sounds terrible, but in GI cancers often, we look at 3% and say, that may not be worth it. To treat 100 people, said a different way, you treat 100 people and the therapy fails 97% of the time, right? So it's the same, either pushing it by 3 or it fails 97% of the time. And so it's all about presenting statistics, risk-benefit, and then you can't really explain what it's gonna be like. I mean, because people bring in either terror of what we do, that it's going to be the worst thing they've ever done, and it's going to be suffering, and others are like, well, it'll be fine, whatever. So they come in with different willingness to trade off. But then there's one other component that I always think is the hardest one, and that is regret. Is that, what if I didn't do something and it comes back? If I traded off something and I'm the one, I don't know if I was the 1% or not. So a lot of what we do in our world is avoidance of regret. So we overtreat a lot of people so that we can look back and say, we did everything. But you can't see that at the moment. You can only see that later. So it's a very tricky question. It's how we spend most of our day is trying to balance those decisions and recommendations. But would you like to?
I would just add one thing that's from a book that I'm sure you've read, When Breath Becomes Air, which is written by a physician who was a cancer patient. And he wrote in that book, doctor, if you could tell me if I had a week, a month, or a year to live, I'd make different decisions. So I think that factors into how we talk to patients about how much time they have. And I often will then talk about the uncertainty of that. And so it's imperfect. And I think I've learned that I have to just acknowledge that.
Yeah, no, it's tough. It's a good question. Thank you.
And the audience question right there.
I so appreciate hearing your perspective on this because I've been waiting for a long time.
If you could just step a little closer.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your perspective on this. I've been waiting for a really long time to hear kind of this inside from a doctor and being a caregiver. I've experienced this with 2 members of my family, taking care of both of them, and it's been really painful. And I guess one of my biggest questions is, why is there not more psychological support for not only the patient, but the family? It is just a brutal process, as you all know. And I feel as though if there was more support given to the family, maybe some decisions would be different. Maybe some of that hope would have been able to be kept alive in a different way. And quite honestly, I also think that if you want to just look at it medically, I think it would probably have prevented some illness in my family and the ones who have survived because it's been so hard.
Hear, hear to that. I mean, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, you bring a lot of things to mind. We have a friend who recently lost her father and developed breakthrough COVID. I mean, because of her exhaustion from helping him, and I totally agree with you. I think there's finding a way to give psychological support to caregivers is hugely important. And I don't know if you all have a wellness community or cancer support community around here, but there are organizations around. The one I'm involved with, and it's a model that is in a lot of places, but we do simultaneous support groups for patients and caregivers, so that recognizing that how
we
important.
do have that.
Yeah, I'm sure you
And
have
kids,
something.
too.
We don't
Some
do
groups,
kids
yeah.
as much, but some do. So I think there are some resources out there, and I think it's if as much as you can find that, and as much as doctors' offices can provide that information to patients and to their families, it really does improve. It might not lead to physically more different outcomes, but I think the psychological component is hugely important.
It's tricky though too. I mean, there's not one prescription, right? There's not one, this is what you need. You sort of have to drift and find a little bit of what you need, what you're missing. There are not enough resources out there. So actually, I was looking for a therapist. I can't get anybody to take me on, but you can imagine why that's true. There aren't enough people to deliver this care. And it's not always supported. I mean, Hope Connections is free because it's making up for something that the healthcare system doesn't really provide naturally, or doesn't provide it well, in my opinion. And so we second your comment, trying to at least unearth it so that they're thinking about it is what I tend to be is my job. And then trying to guide as much as we can using our social workers and other folks to the right prescription. But then I'll add one more thing and I'll shut up. It's time. Just being a caregiver or a manager of cancer is, they're kind of near full-time jobs. And so you need the village, you need, your own time away at the doctor's office. And so to add one more thing, is sometimes just impossible. So, it's an unmet need that gets sacrificed, I think, because of all of those. You have more to add?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Great. So the next question is for Liza. There was an article in the New York Times that one breast cancer survivor finds October Breast Cancer Month to be a traumatic trigger. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. You can add that to your list of reasons why Breast Cancer Awareness Month is.
We don't need it anymore.
No, I think any traumatic experience we all come to things differently, and for some people that's empowering to know that there are many breast cancer patients out there and that they're coming together and we're improving things. But I can imagine for many people. I mean, I'm in my house we're not allowed to talk about it anyway. So we wait for March, which is Colon Cancer Awareness Month, which is our month, and pancreatic cancer, which is June, and there are.
She knows them too.
Yeah, no, I know. I know the colors too. But anyway, I don't mean to be flip about that. I mean, it's I do actually think that's a really interesting perspective, and I'm sure it is not confined to one person. And I think thinking that is something for the breast cancer community to think about is everything we're doing beneficial, or might we think about doing things in a different way? And the other cancer communities too. I mean, I'm sure there are colon cancer patients that can say the same thing, and families,
Great. Okay, so John, you're up next. Currently, what percentage of cancer patients are now breast cancer, and what percentage of funding goes to breast cancer research over the others?
We know the number. I'm not sure the exact percentages. I might phone a friend on that, but it's still very common. Breast cancer, 1 in 9, right? 1 in 9 women.
Cause of cancer diagnoses and deaths, right?
Yeah.
In women.
But if you look at, like, lung cancer is a winner, GI cancers collectively are the most common and fatal. But for every dollar, there's 10 times more dollars for breast cancer. So
for every dollar for all the other cancers.
For all the other cancers combined. So they have 10 times more money in their war chest than all the other cancers combined. So it's a big difference. And when you look at a basic science researcher just graduating and going into a lab, you exist on funding. You can't succeed, and so you go to the places where there are pots of money, and there are just more pots of money with a pink ribbon tag on them than all the others combined. And so that then builds the incremental science that then builds the clinical research that launches the success. But on the flip side of that, it's important to note that I think the number is 90% of all breast cancer patients, regardless of stage, live 5 years or more. And it's not true for most cancers. So that's the success. So it's not anger. It's really not. Don't hear it. I mean, yeah, some days, but it's really jealousy and the observation that it works. That strategy of the all hands on deck, fund this, works in terms of success in science and medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get the sort of Komen organization to look at other cancers?
It's not easy. There are a whole bunch of reasons why some people think that some of the bad cancers don't have advocacy. Some say because they didn't live long enough to march in the 5K. But their families left behind and the like. And so some of it's sort of, futility. I don't know, there's an apathy about it in some levels. One of the things we're trying to do at Georgetown in the Rush Center is to put us all under one tent. The second most effective advocacy group on the planet, cancer advocacy, is the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, right, which is 150 different diseases, but it's one bicycle ride. And so how do we gather together and build advocacy around these, because they are different. I mean, you note this in what you wrote, is that the belief was that there was some sort of trickle-down research, that what we would learn in one cancer would directly apply to another cancer. And so we might as well start with breast cancer. That's the perfect place to start. And it just hasn't worked out that way in a lot of...
They're so different.
Yeah, they're just...
But use the same machine. I think that's a good point.
Sorry?
Use the same machine for fundraising.
The framework that's been set. Well, and I also contend, and I don't know that this is true, but that I think the breast cancer movement, as many things do, came out of the fact that women's health was so ignored, and breast cancer was, men designed the treatments, and they were barbaric, and they didn't consider how a woman felt about the way she looked or what might come afterwards. And breasts, we don't need them anymore, so you don't need them anymore. And so I think that that led to a real strength in numbers of people who were angry about that. And so as I say, I think, that's frequently where really strong movements come out of something in which people feel as if they have been dismissed. I mean, John talks about the HIV/AIDS. The gay community made also, I think, because they started off at a point in which people were dismissing the disease. Really, well, you get some fire in your belly about these things and move them forward.
We're working at it. We're trying.
Good.
And we're doing better, to be fair. We are doing better, and we are making progress, which is why I'm excited about the decade to come.
Great. Well, then I just have one more note from our audience at home. This person would like to thank you so much for sharing your story and, quote, pulling back the curtain, unquote, as Liza said, on all three partners in the story, the patient, the caregiver, and the providers. So thank you for your fabulous book on this, and I hope that everybody will go home and read it. And if you're in medical school, it sounds like this is a must-read. For those of you watching at home, you can still purchase a copy. It will be bookplate signed, and through the link that's in your chat or through the link on our webpage. That will be open until 10 p.m. For those of you here in the building, you can purchase a book after this and get it signed right on the page. So thank you all very much for coming, and check out westportlibrary.org for future and recorded events. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if the mic's still on, thank you for giving up 2 nights away from family
Yes,
for the support of this.
My pleasure.
This is hardworking and mover and shaker in this space. So thank you very
You're
much
welcome.
for
Thank
doing
you.
that.